We usually picture the founding of a nation as a grand, dignified affair, kings ordained by divine right, celebrated by a grateful public. The birth of a unified England offered none of that grace. It was a paranoid, blood-soaked fight for survival. It all started with King Athelstan. In the year 927, he managed to do what no one else had. He brought the entire country under one unified rule, becoming the very first king of all England. But unifying a fractured nation paints a massive target on your back. To secure his brand new crown, Athelstan believed he had to eliminate his most obvious rival, his own half-brother, Edwin. He bypassed a standard execution. Instead, Athelstan forced Edwin onto a small wooden boat with absolutely no oars. He pushed him out to sea and left him to the mercy of the waves. Edwin eventually drowned. That brutal decision completely broke Athelstan. He was so crushed by the guilt of murdering his own flesh and blood that he spent the rest of his life doing public penance. He never married, and he never produced an heir. Athelstan successfully forged England, but he died alone and tormented. He set a grim precedent for everything that followed. This new throne offered no divine protection. It was a deadly trap that would consume almost everyone who tried to claim it. Whatever dignity Athelstan brought to the crown evaporated almost immediately under his successors. The next few decades of English rule dissolved into an embarrassing string of petty feuds and bizarre physical ailments. Take Edmund I. He managed to fight off Viking invasions, but his reign ended at his own dinner party. An exiled criminal crashed the feast, and instead of calling his guards, Edmund tried to physically drag the man out himself. The king was stabbed to death on the floor of his own hall in what was basically a royal bar brawl. His successor, King Edred, survived the battlefield but was entirely defeated by his own stomach. He suffered from a digestive disease so severe that he physically could not swallow his food. To survive, Edred would chew his meals thoroughly, suck out the juices, and then spit the mashed-up leftovers out. His royal servants were then forced to eat the king's pre-chewed, regurgitated food. Then there was King Eadwig, a 15-year-old monarch who humiliated the crown on his very first day. While the kingdom's most important nobles and bishops waited at his coronation feast, the teenage king ditched the party to hook up with a noblewoman and her mother in a private bedroom. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to physically drag him back to his own celebration. These early kings were incredibly fragile. They were constantly undone by their own failing bodies, explosive tempers, and teenage impulses, and that personal weakness made the entire kingdom dangerously unstable. Soon, those embarrassing blunders gave way to calculated, lethal betrayals. The threat shifted from bad stomachs and party crashers to the king's own family members and closest allies. Ironically, the most treacherous of all was known as Edgar the Peaceful. When Edgar heard rumors about a beautiful woman named Elfrida, he sent a nobleman to evaluate her. The nobleman lied, married her himself, and when Edgar found out he'd been tricked, he invited the man on a private hunting trip in the woods. The nobleman never returned, and Edgar took Elfrida as his queen. But Elfrida proved to be just as ruthless as her new husband. When Edgar died, the throne passed to his teenage son from a previous marriage, Edward. Elfrida wanted her own biological son in power, so she decided to orchestrate Edward's murder. The trap was sprung right here, at Corfe Castle. The young king stopped by for a visit and was offered a drink while still sitting on his horse. As he raised the cup to his lips, Elfrida's men ambushed him. They stabbed him, terrifying his horse, which bolted and dragged the bleeding king to his death. The Anglo-Saxon court had completely devolved into a zero-sum meat grinder. Family ties meant absolutely nothing, and assassination was the standard mechanism for political advancement. With Edward dead, Elfrida's son took the throne. He is remembered as Ethelred the Unready, and his paranoia would doom the country. Fearing an overthrow, Ethelred made the disastrous decision to order the mass execution of every Danish person living in England on St. Brice's Day. That massacre included the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, the King of Denmark. Enraged, Sweyn launched a full-scale invasion to avenge her. These rusted Viking blades are remnants of the massive, brutal military retaliation that flooded across the English coast. This invasion kicked off an era of absolute ruthlessness. Ethelred's son, a fierce warrior named Edmund Ironside, managed to fight off the invaders for a short time, but his reign was cut short when an assassin hid inside the royal cesspit and thrust a spear straight up through the toilet while the king was using it. With the English resistance literally gutted, a Danish ruler named Canute the Great took control. Canute was merciless. To punish a nobleman who had repeatedly switched sides, Canute executed him and tossed his body over the walls of London to be eaten by feral dogs, the ultimate medieval dishonor. The petty vengeance among successors escalated to sickening levels. Canute's heir, Harold Harefoot, captured a rival claimant to the throne and had him blinded with red-hot pokers. When Harold died shortly after, his half-brother Harthacnut was so furious about a past slight that he dug up Harold's corpse, chopped its head off, and threw the body into a swamp. By the mid-11th century, a century of endless blood feuds, bizarre assassinations, and violent overcorrections had left the English crown politically fractured and morally exhausted. Out of all that carnage emerged a bizarrely peaceful ruler, Edward the Confessor. Deeply religious, Edward somehow managed to pause the violence and hold the kingdom together for 24 years. But Edward's extreme piety carried a fatal flaw. He was so devout that he likely took a vow of celibacy, meaning he lived more like a monk than a monarch. When he died, he hadn't produced a single heir. That ultimate royal failure created a catastrophic power vacuum. In the year 1066, a mad scramble for the vacant throne drew in massive rival armies from both Norway and Normandy at the exact same time. The English nobleman who grabbed the crown, Harold Godwinson, faced an impossible whiplash. He marched his army north at breakneck speed and successfully annihilated the Viking invasion. Before he could even celebrate, he received word that the Normans had landed on the south coast. He had to turn his exhausted men around and march them 200 miles back down the country. The two forces finally collided at the Battle of Hastings. Harold's men held a defensive shield wall for hours, but it eventually collapsed and the king was killed in the chaos. The entire story of that kingdom-ending battle is woven directly into this 230-foot stretch of linen, the Bayeux Tapestry. Harold's death brought a violent end to 5 centuries of Anglo-Saxon rule. William of Normandy claimed a throne that had been hollowed out by 100 years of internal treachery. A state built on fratricide and fragile alliances could not withstand the pressure of 2 simultaneous invasions. The history of England's first kings shows that power was never a divine gift. It was a brutal game of survival that the Anglo-Saxons eventually lost.
Thanks for watching! Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.